Well, hi there. Some of you noticed that not very long ago we built this tank. We've done tank builds in the past and we plan to do a lot of awesome terrarium tank builds in the future because I love planted tanks. There's just so much to love about them. I love bioactive because they're low maintenance and you can just make them pretty by adding things like, well, live plants to them. But I am not really all that into plants that are super difficult to take care of or that require a whole ton of crazy plant maintenance. There are some people who are way into that kind of thing. This video is not really for you. I hope you enjoy it, but it's not made for you. This video is really more for people like me who want beautiful planted tanks, but who aren't like huge plant experts. A lot of my knowledge about which plants do well in vivaria pretty much just comes from trial and error. I've lost a lot of plants over the years and I keep kind of getting closer and closer to which ones do I really like, which ones really work the best for my purposes. And so that is why we have created this list of 5 of the best terrarium plants for beginners who aren't very good at plants. I'd like to thank our patrons at Patreon who have provided the funding that we need to be able to experiment with a lot more types of plants and to build cool tanks like this. We're really looking forward to what we might be able to do on a grand scale here in the near future thanks to your support. So thank you so much for being there for us. First on our list is this one. It's back behind me, and that is the pothos. Honestly, you know, if you want a pretty plant in a tank that really will put up with anything, pothos is the ultimate. For one thing, they're very, very easy to cultivate, which means, you know, if you've got cuttings of pothos, you just stick them in some water and they'll shoot out some roots and bam, you've got new pothos. So even if you're messing it up all the time, you could be growing new ones and replacing them. They're very fast growing, which means that you can really, you know, make a lot of it in a hurry, and you can plant them all over in terraria. They can grow in soil, which is pretty normal for a plant. They can also grow just straight in water. They'll shoot out roots down into the water and they can handle that, which most plants just die in that sort of a situation. But even if you let them dry out, even if you let them dry out to the point that you look in there and you go, oh, that plant is just flopped over, as soon as you water it, it probably bounces right back. The reality is the pothos are going to be a lot hardier as far as water goes than any animals that you're going to have in that enclosure. So as long as you're not killing your animals, your pothos will probably be fine. They also have very low light requirements. This has been one of the hardest things for me with terrarium plants over the years, is that sometimes they need more light than you can really provide in that tank. And pothos do really well even if there's hardly any light at all. They've also got very broad leaves, which are really great if you've got frogs or geckos because it gives them a big surface to climb on. So in addition to looking nice, they're also functionally very nice, and they're also kind of a vining plant, and those vines are the same way. Animals will be able to climb on them, so they do more than just look nice. There are a lot of pros to pothos, but there are some cons as well. They're kind of a large plant. Even the individual leaves are sort of big and they grow very quickly, so they can quickly overwhelm smaller terraria, especially if you're not ready to prune them back fairly often. You are going to have to probably clip your pothos or they'll just overgrow the whole thing and you'll just have a box full of pothos. And they are so common that they're boring. I mean, we learned this when we made our first terrarium build, which was just that people were like, pothos? Why pothos? Well, because pothos is awesome and easy, and it was easy for us to get, and they're everywhere. They're great, but they're also so common that a lot of people will be like, boring. Next on our list is the spiderwort, which is a weird name for this plant, but not the weirdest name, because more commonly you will hear them referred to by their less culturally sensitive name of wandering Jews. I don't know why they're called this, because to my knowledge, they have no religion, but they are a very, very neat plant, and they've got a lot of pros. One of them is that they're very easy to cultivate. This is just a cutting that I have of a spiderwort plant, and you stick it in water, they'll start growing roots, and I've got them in tanks all over the place. In fact, I have so many of them now that when I cut them, I'm like, do I even bother to root them or do I just let them die? Makes me sad to let them die, but I've got no place for them. They grow like crazy. Did I mention they're fast growing? They're very, very fast growing, which is nice because sometimes it takes a while for a tank that you've just built to really grow into what it should be. These will be there very, very quickly. Sort of like pothos, these can grow in water. They grow better in soil, and if you let them dry out, they'll probably be okay. Probably not quite as okay as pothos, but pretty darn okay. This is a really difficult plant to kill because of overwatering or underwatering. They also have relatively low light requirements, which is fantastic because, you know, you can almost always provide enough light for a low light plant, but getting enough intense light without really just having a crazy amount of light in a terrarium can be difficult. So some of the high light plants are more difficult. Low light, awesome. And it's purple. Though I have noticed when I grow them under lower light, a lot of times they don't come in quite as purple as this, but it's purple, which adds a little variety to your tank. Beautiful, amazing plants. They do have some cons though. Really just this one. They grow really, really fast, and so you're gonna have to trim them back often. And when you trim them back, you're going to notice they're going to grow from auxiliary meristems, which just means, you know, they're sort of vining in one direction, but if you cut off the end of the vine from which they're growing, they'll start to grow from little backups that they've got all over the place. So you might end up going from one vine to many vines. They can take over very quickly if you don't maintain them. They're easy to grow, and that's really their only con. Next on our list is the heart-leafed philodendron, which this is a really cool plant, and you've definitely seen them before. They're, in a lot of ways, a lot like pothos, except smaller. This one actually has some huge leaves. Pothos leaves can get to be like this big, or even bigger. They can get enormous on a really big plant. This is about as big. I mean, they'll get a little bigger, but these guys, you'll see them in my tanks. The leaves stay pretty small compared to a pothos. Like the pothos, though, these are one that can grow in water, they can grow in soil, and you can let them dry out quite a bit and they'll be okay. And they also do really well in low light conditions. This is actually a heck of a lot like a pothos, just not a pothos. A couple of cons. One of them is they're not quite as hardy in my experience as the pothos, but I mean, that's not saying much. Almost nothing is as hardy as a pothos. To be perfectly honest, I'm just looking for cons here. This is an amazing plant. They will grow nicely for you, but not quite as fast as a pothos. They're terrific. They're terrific. Next on our list is the creeping fig. This is actually one I discovered a little later on, but I really like them. One thing I like about them is they've got much smaller leaves than the other plants we've talked about, especially the pothos and the philodendron. That's a pro and a con, but it makes it so that they don't fill up your tank so much. They're more just kind of there for beauty. They'll grow as a vining plant. They'll grow right up onto your background, and they'll really hold on. So they'll grow any sort of like sticks or rocks or anything in there. These will grow right up onto them and look awesome. They also come in a couple of variations. This is the non-variegated, which means it doesn't have any white in the leaves. There's also a variegated variety of them. They're basically exactly the same species and everything. And so you can have multiple different looks for the creeping figs in your tank, and yet the care is all the same. They're also fairly fast growing. Not as fast growing as the bigger plants, but for a plant this small, like with these little leaves, I mean, they'll vine out real fast. They do really well in damp conditions, which is important in tropical vivaria. And they're easy to propagate. And you just make a cutting and put them on some damp soil. They'll just take right off on their own. You don't need to worry about anything. They do have some cons though. I find that if you get it too dry, these will die a little bit faster than the plants we've talked about to this point. But they're still very, very hardy. They also, kind of like everything we've talked about, because they grow so easily and so quickly, they're going to need quite a bit of trimming. And sort of like with the spiderwort, they'll start to grow from auxiliary meristems. So once you cut the end off, you might get them going in all kinds of new directions. These guys are also a little bit more for decoration than they are for like being climbed upon by a frog or a gecko, just because they've got little leaves and little vines compared to those. But that's also a pro. And these need a little bit more light than the three plants we've talked about before. Those were all low light plants. This is probably more of like a medium light plant. So make sure it's in a place that's a little bit better lit. Make sure your lighting is adequate in your enclosure. If you don't have lighting, this plant's probably not for you. And last on our list is the peperomia rosso. And I gotta say, there are lots of peperomias out there, and lots of them can be really good for enclosures. A lot of them are really big, and they're great for climbing on and everything. They do great. This is one I've discovered just recently, and I really liked it. There are a lot of pros to this. One of them was one I was told about when I got it, but then had to experiment with. So mine, for example, has lost a leaf. And normally that's just a huge disappointment when a leaf falls off of a plant. But if this one, if you take it and you just put it on some damp soil, say in one of your enclosures, and just leave it, you will be splendidly surprised by what you will find in a couple of weeks, because you'll have a whole new plant. They're just beautiful. I think their little red stems really add a lot. They really are a very decorative plant, and I think that they add a lot to an enclosure. And they do really well with the type of lighting and humidity that you tend to find in a vivarium. It's not uncommon among the plants on this list. It's just, you know, this is a more unique and unusual plant, but it still does great in a terrarium sort of environment. They also stay relatively small, which isn't the case for most of the other plants on this list. A lot of them will get huge if you let them. This one, it'll get quite a bit bigger than this, but more reasonable in smaller terraria. But they do have some cons. They need brighter light than do a lot of the other plants on this list. This one isn't going to do quite as well if you really, really keep it wet, or if you let it dry out entirely, as the other plants on this list. And if you decide that it needs to be trimmed back, that it's getting too big, because this isn't like a vining plant, trimming it back is going to be a little bit less obvious how you should do that. I'm actually not sure what I would do in that situation. My hope is that it doesn't outgrow any of the applications where I'm keeping it right now. In conclusion, if you want to build really beautiful tanks, you know, really beautiful bioactive enclosures that are also easy to maintain, these 5 plants are a really great place to start. With the reptile room, I've actually been doing a lot of experimenting with other sorts of plants. So if you would like to see more plant videos in the future, please let me know. I actually even know botanists and people who, you know a lot more about plants than your typical zoologist. And so if you would like some more like intermediate and advanced sorts of content on plants, I know the right people, we could make that happen. So just comment your thoughts on these ideas down in the comments, and we could take this to the next level. For now, it's pretty hard to miss with these 5. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. This video is made for people who are like me. Jeez.
Every time.
What is different today? Of the best, easy to care for. This is exactly how this should go. It shouldn't have worked so well the other times. Because I don't really have any idea why it worked so well.
You gotta angle it somehow, or?
Next on our list, oh, that has spiderwebs all over it. One moment, please.